Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofoutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Dinah Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is podcast episode 117, The Drums of Autumn Read-Along, Week 3. Hello! So, I have updated the reading schedule for this read-along. It will now be 35 episodes and will end on August 12th, 2018. I wanted to make sure each podcast was around an hour to an hour and 15 minutes long, and I wanted to finish ahead of season 4. By that point, there should be a whole bunch of season 4 information out there. They'll be coming off of San Diego Comic-Con. So I want to be ready for that. And maybe we can fit a novella in too. That would be fun. So the summary goes something like this. Brianna wakes to take an unexpected call. Roger plans a visit. Brianna sends confusing signals. There's a sweet airport reunion. After his conference, off to the Scottish festival they go. Brianna struggles with the past, her grief, and healing. A kilted Roger performs to an appreciative crowd. Brianna's wounds are exposed. Roger passes Uncle Joe's assessment. The Apollo 11 mission prevails. Yeah, it's like that for the both of them. Inside the chapters. The 3 chapters we're covering, 3 through 5, this episode, all center around Roger and Brianna. We had left Jamie and Claire in their moonlight rock embrace. And now we're jumping forward to Boston, Massachusetts, June 1969, the minister's cat. Roger calls Brianna from Scotland and gets the time difference woefully wrong. She is dead asleep and wakes with a humorous start. They haven't seen each other in some time, and Roger is nervous and unsure of her because she hadn't answered his letter. He explains there's a conference he can attend the following month, and does she want to see him? He nervously talks, worrying she'll reject him. They speak over each other. Of course she wants to see him. He laughs as their words collide once more. He understood now. This warms her through. She acknowledges he's the only person who could understand her. She'd been dreaming about Jamie when he called. She was trying to catch up with him while they hiked in the mountains, and she thinks it's because she used to do that with her daddy Frank. And Roger brings up bagging Munros in Scotland and explains it's a pastime to hike mountains over 3,000 feet there. And as an aside, if you go to the show notes, whether you're in iTunes or any of the streaming services, or you go onto the website, I have extensive notes that basically follow the podcast. You can go back and reference what I said later without listening to the podcast again. But anywhere in the notes, if there's an asterisk, it's because down below, underneath all of the paragraphs, there are links of interest for you to click on. Some are videos, some are websites. Enjoy. Roger's laugh brought the memory of his parting kiss last upon her lips. Roger and Brianna liked to play games with each other. She guessed he was in Inverness, Scotland, and not in England because his accent was always thicker when he was there. He playfully rolled his R's for her. "Where are you now, Scotland or England?" she said, then interrupted before he could answer. "No, let me see if I can guess. It's Scotland. You're in Inverness." "That's right." The surprise was evident in his voice. "How did you know that?" She stretched, scissoring her long legs slowly under the sheets. You roll your R's when you've been talking to other Scots. You don't when you talk to English people. I noticed when we went to London. There was no more than a faint catch in her voice. It was getting easier, she thought. And here, I was beginning to think you were psychic. And she wishes he was there now. I also reference in the show notes what page, if I take text from the actual book. And I am reading on my Nook app on an iPad mini, so it's about the size of an average book. Bree admitting wanting him catches Roger off guard. She tries to explain why she didn't write, but he says there'll be time to discuss it when he's there in a month. He's happy she said he could visit. She's happy remembering her hand upon his chest. Now sleepless, she goes to the kitchen for a glass of milk. While peering into the refrigerator, the contents become the standing stones in her mind's eye. She shivers. She knows why she didn't write, yet she has no idea how to explain it to Roger. He was part of the devastation and loss of learning about Jamie Fraser and her mother leaving. Though her mother wasn't dead, there was nothing to do but grieve it nonetheless. She was utterly lonely without her. Brianna's Catholic upbringing shows as she hears an ambulance and crosses herself. She says a small prayer for those who need it. She also prays daily for her mother and father. Even though Uncle Joe Abernathy knew everything that happened, only Roger could hear the stones too. The experience had marked them after Claire went. She needed to heal and rebuild her life away from Scotland and stone circles. When Roger was present, she couldn't forget any of it, not even for a moment. Had he cared and protected her only because her mother had asked him to? She doesn't want a future based on crushing obligation. That is a theme of Brianna. So pay attention to words like obligation. It means much to her. And you'll find out why as time unfolds. Was she presumptuous that he wanted a future with her? She thinks if she left and came back again to him, they could do it right at their choosing. If they were to take the relationship further, it would need to be their choice. Bree sits down to do her mathematics work. It's soothing and controlled. When she had come back to Boston alone and back to school, engineering had seemed a much safer choice than history, solid, fact-based, reassuringly immutable, above all, controllable. She picked up a pencil, sharpened it slowly, enjoying the preparation, then bent her head and read the first problem. Slowly, as it always did, the calm, inexorable logic of the figures built its web inside her head, trapping all the random thoughts, wrapping the distracting emotions up in silken threads like so many flies. Round the central axis of the problem, logic spun her web, orderly and beautiful, as an orb weaver's jeweled confection. Only one small thought stayed free of its strands, hovering in her mind like a bright, tiny butterfly. "I'm glad you said yes," he'd said. So was she. Again, we see a spider web. We saw this in the second book, in Dragonfly, and we also saw this in Voyager in the book. We didn't see it in the television show because Lawrence Stern was not part of the television show. But throughout the Outlander series, and even in the novellas and the Lord John books, we do see this concept of the weaving tapestry and how things are interconnected and what thread is being picked for this storyline. And I sort of wonder how the inside of Diana Gabaldon's head thinks. It must look like this incredible web. But Brianna needed her thoughts caught and captured. She needed them to be quieted. She's very logical, and she doesn't want to run on emotion. It's really important to her. The following month, she's at the airport with her friend Gail to pick Roger up. Gail sounds vapid and unworldly, but able to fill conversational spaces with ease. She thinks England and Scotland are the same. Brianna quickly clears up this misconception of England versus the United Kingdom and Scotland. Nosy Gail wants to know if Bree and Roger have had sex yet. Mind you, this is 1969. This is not 1989 or 2009, which was still pretty hush-hush, the way that people at least looked at it on the surface. Bree is aghast at the question, but tells her no. At this moment, Roger appears. Gail is clearly impressed by him, while Bree stiffens at the sight. Oh, is that him? He looks like a pirate. He did, and Brianna felt the bottom of her stomach drop another inch or two. Roger was what her mother called a black Celt, with clear olive skin and black hair, and eyes put in with a sooty thumb, thick black lashes, round eyes you expected to be blue, but that were instead a surprising deep green. With his hair worn long enough to brush his collar, disheveled and beard stubbled, he looked not only rakish, but mildly dangerous. Alarm tingled up her spine at the sight of him. Maybe she shouldn't have let him come after all. Bree's body reacts at the sight of him. I think she's already chosen him, even though she has misgivings. He sees her and lights the room. She runs to him without thinking. He meets her halfway, nearly picking her up from the ground and squeezing her hard. Can you hear the music playing in the background? I do. And again, I think it's funny how Brianna thinks she hasn't already chosen him. He kisses her, and she doesn't want his whiskey-flavored lips to stop. But semi-breathlessly, they do stop. Gail breaks into the reunion scene. Hello! You must be Roger, because if you're not, Roger's sure in for a shock when he shows up, isn't he? Gail's good for some comedic relief right here, and tension breaking between the two of them. Gail fawns over Roger's accent. Brianna finally remembers to introduce her friend. Roger plays along, rolling his R's in a most undignified fashion. Bree is not amused. He explains, in addition to the conference, he's playing at a Scottish festival to earn money while he's in town. And Roger says, by day, mild-mannered historian Roger Wakefield is a harmless Oxford academic, but at night he dons his secret tartan regalia and becomes the dashing Roger Mackenzie. He's such a cheesy ham, or a hammy cheese. He sometimes does Scottish folk singing at Cayleys and Highland Games. And I think it's funny that Gail knows about kilts, but is unaware Scotland is a separate country within the United Kingdom. Bree is once again not amused, and Gail remarks about the big box. It's Roger's Bowrin. I know if you listen to Davina Porter, she says Bodrin. That is not correct in Gaelic. In Gaelic, not Gaelis. It's Bowrin. It's a Celtic drum. She also offers to drive Roger to the festival, which Bree handily quashes. After they drop Roger, Gail again presses her about them having sex and thinks Bree is crazy if she doesn't. Given it's 1969, I think young adults have always been the same, no matter what outward social mores would say they should adhere to. But it is very important because it's been brought up twice. Her Catholic upbringing has been brought up. Her unease about obligation has been brought up. All of these are foundational to what makes Bree tick and what's important to her in this relationship, if there is one. As Brianna drives Roger to the Scottish festival, they play the Minister's Cat. Roger says it's a Scottish game, but upon my research I found it's a Victorian parlour game. And you go alphabetically. There's a link in the show notes. And how Roger and Brianna play it is one of them gives a word, an A word, the other gives an A word, and to see who had the best vocabulary word, that's who wins that round. So there are 26 rounds since there are 26 letters in the English alphabet. They decide to play for a while she drives. Well, that's a soft pitch for both of us. Draw. Okay. The minister's cat is He could see the wheels turning in her mind, then the gleam in her narrow blue eyes as inspiration struck. A coxygodinius cat. Roger narrowed his own eyes, trying to work that one out. A cat with a wide backside? She laughed, braking slightly as the car hit a switchback curve. A cat that's a pain in the ass. That's a real word, is it? Uh-huh. One of Mama's medical terms. Coxygodinia is a pain in the region of the tailbone. She used to call the hospital administration coxygodinians all the time. They have a very fun version of Minister's Cat going. I like it. These two are definitely a brainy and vocabulary-laden duo. They reach the turn for the festival. Roger is apologetic at how far it is from Boston. Brianna says it isn't far, and she scoffs at the 150-mile drive. My father always said that was the difference between an American and an Englishman. An Englishman thinks 100 miles is a long way. An American thinks 100 years is a long time. It's true. That is something that my own family noticed when we were in Scotland, that people were stunned at how far we were driving in such a short amount of time, or simply at all, because they wouldn't do it. And I remember meeting a man who worked at one of the castle shops for Historic Scotland, and his wife was coming to the United States for work, and she was going to Seattle and Indianapolis and somewhere else. And he was wondering if in a few days they could drive from Seattle to Indianapolis. And I chuckled. No, that would be a very long trip. I said, no, you'll have to fly and then rent a car. Have either of you driven in the United States? No, they hadn't. An adventure, I'm sure, was had by both of them. The conversation takes a turn while using the minister's cat as a conversational pathway. Brianna becomes aloof and thoughtful. And Roger decides tea is the only sensible answer here, but Bree hates tea. She's no Englishwoman indeed. Roger reflects upon her. She looks like her heritage, but seems more. She's just more of everything. She begins to explain what she's thinking, while Roger is thinking of all the ways he likes her. She tells him how great he was after her mother left and wanted to know if he's been back to Craignadoon. He hasn't been back. Isn't that the minister's cat is a fraidy cat? The minister's cat is scared stiff of that place. He wouldn't set foot up there if it were knee-deep in sardines. It's very cute. They are playful with each other, and they use humor, much like Jamie does, in order to navigate uncomfortable waters, even though ultimately they're pretty straightforward with each other, and they get what needs to be said eventually. She points out how much he helped regardless of being scared. She tells him, though, she's not spoken of her parents in half a year, and she can't be around him without talking about her parents immediately. He notices that she blushes. Her nose gets pink, her chest gets red, her ears get pink. That's exactly what Jamie does. She also says she had a crush on him and didn't know if he was just nice to her for her mother. He assures her he wasn't just nice. And she wasn't sure what to do. Anyway, I thought, well, it was either throw myself into your arms or get the hell out of Dodge. So I did, but I couldn't figure out how to explain it without looking like an idiot. And then you wrote. It was worse. Well, see, I do look like an idiot. And Roger's response, will you drive into that car in front of us if I kiss you? So he does understand what she was trying to say, even though it is not a direct path that she's taking, I don't think. He's always a gentleman. He reminds me of a combination of Frank and Jamie. And I think given the era that he lives in, he would be far more like Jamie given the opportunity. After they park the car, Roger suddenly realizes where he brought her. And he's upset with himself, and he's worried for her because she was just saying she can't not think about Jamie and Claire when he's around because he's tied to those experiences. He's tied to her mother leaving and her mother confessing about Jamie and the searching that they did to find him in history. And now they're going to a Scottish festival. So effectively, they're digging up the past that her mother and Jamie are part of. As this chapter ends, I wrote, they are trying to find their way around each other. They're both aggravatingly slow at communication. They don't want to hurt the other and are worried about how much they care for the other. Dating across continents is never easy, but now it is far simpler than the time of expensive phone calls and written letter. The phone call he made to her probably cost him £20, which was a substantial amount of money in 1969. Their situation is further complicated by the Stones' time travel and the matter of her two fathers. They obviously love each other deeply and can't stand being apart. But Brianna is wise, wanting to discover whether they are choosing each other for the sake of each other and not their shared knowledge and experience. Brianna is young, but she's worldly, and she's had to grow up really fast. And even though she has Uncle Joe Abernathy, she basically has to navigate everything by herself. Yes, her mother left her lots of information and financially secure and all those types of things. But living without a mother and a father is very difficult for somebody so young. I still can't figure out how to live without a mother. And I'm 50 years old, and my mother's been gone for 40 years. And some days it still stings. Does she want Roger to be her family too? She seems like she's pushing him away, but can you imagine the pressure and the determination to forge her own way? She's stubborn, complicated, and fiercely loyal. And she's trying to untangle her mother's marriage to Frank and her mother's deep, loyal, passionate love for Jamie. I mean, she did love Frank once. And then they made a companionable space and raised Brianna together. She gave Frank a child that he could never have. So she's trying to unpack all of that. So imagine the baggage in a therapist's chair. I mean, that's a whole lot. That would fill a room in a lot of months of therapy. Nature and nurture are obviously at work within her. And I adore how Diana has written in Bree's similarities to Jamie, but how she blushes and her religious foundation. Frank raised her Catholic, but was never as devout as Bree. She changed her major to engineering from history, but she can't escape what she is. She was conceived in the past and raised in the present. She's from two different times, whether she wants to be. She dreams of Jamie. Remember the end of Voyager when the Loa showed her Jamie and Claire? That was probably in a dream that she was having. And Roger has also been parentless. He was adopted by his uncle and raised, and he called him his father, even taking his last name. But how does he navigate the world? Even though he's a professor and he's a little older than Brianna is, he doesn't have parents either. It's really difficult when you have no map in front of you. And though his uncle was a good father to him, he wasn't married. So Roger didn't get that demonstrated to him either. And what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to act, and all those things. Chapter 4, A Blast from the Past. Roger finds the dressing area to be quite luxurious in comparison to what he's used to in Scotland. And this leads him to husband-type thinking. Would he be financially able to equal the level of comfort Brianna is used to? She is driving a brand new Mustang. In 1969, that vehicle cost from $2,740 to $4,798. The average American made $5,900 in a year in 1969. It was a pricey car, so it was half or more of an entire year's salary for the average American. So it's not the average car whatsoever. He is not stupid for wondering what income level she expects. He's very traditional, Roger, in some ways. He likes the idea of hearth and home, and he wants her to work and do what she needs to, but he also wants to be a provider and protector. He has an envelope for her. He's hesitant to give it to her based on their earlier conversation and her reaction to seeing the 78th Fraser Highlanders Pipe Band in the flesh. It made him worry about her. Incidentally, the 78th Fraser Highlanders Pipe Band did not come into existence until 1982. This is some of Diana's timey-wimey writing. The Fraser motto is Je suis prêt. I am ready. He continues to worry about her as he's getting ready for the 2 performances he's expected to do. And he's mulling over what he'll do based on the audience. He's having all kinds of thoughts running through his head. He's donning his kilt and such, the whole outfit, while she's off entertaining herself. And in the process, he decides to go full Scots in his kilt and eschews the underwear. The ancient olive drab drawers were military issue circa World War II, one of Roger's few mementos of his father. He didn't bother with pants much in the normal course, but included these with his kilt sometimes as a defensive measure against the amazing boldness of some female spectators. So it tells me that Roger normally goes without underpants? He'd been warned by other performers, but wouldn't have believed it, had he not experienced it firsthand. German ladies were the worst, but he'd known a few American women run them a close second for taking liberties in close quarters. He wanted to protect the family jewels. On his way out, he asked for luck from his father. The appearance of him made Brianna sit up and take notice. Her mother was right about a man in a kilt. It does. It makes them sexy. Very sexy indeed. Then she asks him if he's hungry and goes over the available food options. Octopus on a stick, Baja fish tacos, very Scottish food. Oh, and I wanted to remind you that Outlander Kitchen Cookbook has the Baja fish taco recipe in it, for good measure. Roger has some misgivings about bringing her, and he apologizes, but it turns out she's really okay with it. She thinks the festival is so Scottish. And Roger thinks this is nothing like Scotland. But on further examination, he decides it's the Scots' age-old talent for survival, the ability to adapt to anything and make a profit from it. And then he hugs her, noticing she smells like fresh grass. Remember that Claire smells like herbs and green things when Jamie hugs her? And then he points out to her that she's Scots too. But she doesn't want to eat haggis. She'd rather eat octopus, if she had to. Roger thinks the food vendors are quite unusual. And apparently the festival changes and the vendors stay the same. This vendor asks about his kilt to a bland-faced response. So you Scotch, or you just like wearing a skirt? Having heard several dozen variations of that pleasantry, Roger gave the man a bland look. Well, as my old granda used to say, when you put on your kilt, laddie, you ken for sure you're a man. Brianna rolls her eyes. Kilt jokes. God, if you start telling kilt jokes, I'll drive off and leave you. I swear I will. Och now, You wouldn't do that, would you, lass? Go off and leave a man only because he'll tell you what's worn under the kilt if you like. Her eyes narrowed into blue triangles. Oh, I bet nothing at all's worn under that kilt. Why, I'll bet everything under there is in perfect operating condition, no? Yeah, so she gives her own version of an over-the-top Scottish accent. Then they decide to look around at all the merchandise. Brianna asks why he's using the name Mackenzie. He explains Wakefield is his adopted father's name. His family name is Mackenzie. Roger Jeremiah Mackenzie, in fact. Jerry was his father. His nickname was Jemmy when he was young. He explains why Jeremiah was the best family name to choose from. Ambrose Mackenzie, that's your great-grandfather, Rog. He'll have been a boatwright in Dingwall. And there's Mary Oliphant. I knew your great-grandma Oliphant, did I tell you? Lived to be 97 and sharp as a tack to her last breath. Wonderful woman. She was married 6 times, all died of natural causes too, she assured me. But I've only put Jeremiah Mackenzie here since he was your ancestor. The only one she had children by, and I did wonder about that. I asked her, and she closed one eye and nodded at me and said, in Gaelic, which I can't pronounce, better a lobster than no husband. She said some would do for marrying, but Jeremiah was the only lad bonny enough to take her to bed every night. Better a lobster than no husband. What a great line. And I cannot say the Gaelic. It's far too many words for me to come up with anything that sounds reasonable. From here, their conversation veers to Claire explaining sex because they're talking about Roger's great-great-grandmother only going to bed with Jeremiah every night, and he's the only one she chose to have children with, even though she had 5 other husbands. Apparently, Claire explained that one can get pregnant the first time they have sex, or by having sex only once. That is very true. And frankly, you only have to get a penis to the outside on the vulva, and one can get pregnant. It takes one sperm to get up in there and use that cervical mucus as a slip and slide to get pregnant. She explains to Roger the word health is a euphemism for sex in America. Roger is thankful his sparring is holding down the kilt fort with this frank conversation. Then she backwardly asks if he's had sex or has a steady girlfriend right now. If you mean have I, yes. If you mean am I, no. Are you what? You're asking if I've got a girl in England, right? Am I? I don't. Or rather I do, but nothing serious. Have you got a bloke, I mean? What was it your grandmother said? Well, better a lobster than no boyfriend. So yes, there are people I go out with, but I don't have a bonny lad yet. And he says, oh, here's suave Roger. Give it time, lass. And kissed her fingers. Roger, don't be a too shy man, is what I wrote down. Sometimes he's too much of a gentleman. It's time for him to perform. He hands her the envelope. His voice is lovely to her and to the crowd. He's very good. He sings a variety of songs from the old popular ones to those about military. And he comes to a song about Preston Pans, Hey Johnny Cope. And this struck Bree as she realizes her mother and Jamie were both at that battle. She also had an epiphany about herself and Roger during this time. She's very emotional as he's going through the sections of the song. He is in the past while he's in the song. And she thinks some people try to preserve the past, others to escape it. And that was by far the greatest gulf between herself and Roger. Why hadn't she seen it before? And in the bottom are links to videos for all the songs in this chapter. He gets to a piece about the 1715 Jacobite Rising. And at this, she takes the opportunity to open the envelope he had handed her. It's pictures of Claire and Frank, happily married, and it turns out it's their wedding day. This is going on as Roger is singing another Jacobite piece, and she discovers the details of these wedding photos. Roger's set ends with the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. Brianna is overtaken with emotion looking at her mother so sure and happy on her wedding day to Frank. This is one of the issues she has loving Roger. What if she changes her mind? What if she finds someone else like her mother did, regardless of her intentions? Ooh, that's pretty heavy, and that's a very mature thought for her age. A bit later, without discussing her departure from his performance, he needs to leave her for a bit during the calling of the clans. This is where all the clans present are called and accounted for. It can be done during the day. It can be done at night. A traditional ceremony would be where a fire is lit and they come and put their torch in. And they claim that Graham is here, Mackenzie is here, Fraser is here, Cameron is here, etc. They wandered the festival, spending the afternoon together. Pay attention to the description of the people and families at this festival for the later gathering in this book. As the clans were called by torchlight, Brianna pondered the existence of clans today. Her chest felt tight from the smoke and emotion. The clans had died at Culloden, or had they? Yes, they had. This was no more than memory than the calling up of ghosts. None of the people shouting so enthusiastically owned kinship to each other. None of them lived any longer by the claims of laird and land, but... "The Frasers are here!" Sheer panic gripped her, and her hand closed tight on the clasp of her bag. No, she thought. Oh no, I'm not. Then the moment passed, and she could breathe again, but jolts of adrenaline still thrilled through her blood. So she's talking about calling up of ghosts. Claire talked about that as well. That she felt like her mother is with her, that the spirits are around us. And that Claire is a ghost herself in some situations. And they go and read more names, and she's holding onto her bag on her lap, tightly. How could she thought, and then seeing Roger come into the light, fire on his head and his bowrun in his hand, thought again, how could she help it? Brianna struggled to connect her ancestry with the reality of all she has ever known. It's only been 8 months since her mother left for the 18th century to a man who's her biological father. This history the festival rouses is a life her mother and father have lived and are living in. Imagine again her struggle to reconcile it together. She has a similar struggle with Roger as Claire had with Frank. Claire was of the living and Frank of the past. Roger is a historian as well, while Bree wants to be of the now. And she wants to go into the future, and she wants to build things that make sense and are controllable. Again, a lot of baggage. Chapter 5, 200 Years from Yesterday. Snapped back into reality, it's Roger's final day in Boston. The moon landing is anticipated as several people gather at Joe Abernathy's house. Uncle Joe is frustrated over the TV not working, so he asks Bree to figure it out after she introduces the boyfriend, Roger, to him. Joe and Roger have a chat over some whiskey Claire gifted him with before she left. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Lagavulin? But there's a link to it. It's about $55 a bottle to have it shipped. It's pretty pricey whiskey. Joe jumps right in since Claire and Frank are both gone. He wants to know what Roger's intentions are. Since Bree's daddy is dead, I guess I'll get to do the honors. Reckon we got time for the 3rd degree before they land, or shall we keep it short? Roger raised one eyebrow. Your intentions, the doctor elaborated. Oh, strictly honorable. Yeah, I called Bree last night to see if she was coming tonight. No answer. We gone to a Celtic festival up in the mountains. Uh-huh. I called again, 11 p.m. and midnight. No answer. The doctor's eyes were still shrewd, but a good deal less warm. He set his glass down with a small click. Bree's alone, and she's lonely, and she's lovely. I wouldn't like to see anybody take advantage of that, Mr. Wakefield. Neither would I, Dr. Abernathy. If you think that mind me, Mr. Wakefield. I don't want to hear that you've made that girl unhappy. Ever. Roger carefully released his arm from the other's grip. Do you think she looks unhappy? No. On the contrary, it's the way she looks tonight that makes me think I should maybe punch you in the nose on her daddy's behalf. She did look like a woman who'd had a long night and enjoyed it. And as Roger looks on at Brianna, Joe Abernathy sees that he's in love with Brianna and that it's not a fling to him. And he says, like that, is it? Yeah, like that. Claire did say she liked you. Okay, slange. So he had to grill him and do the uncle thing because there isn't anybody else there to help Brianna navigate this stuff. And she'd probably be very upset with Uncle Joe if she knew that he did it. She wants to do things all by herself. And they all anxiously await the Apollo 11 landing. Bree is pressed against Roger. In the safety of people, they can have close contact. Roger is off in his mind while their eyes are glued to the television. He thinks of the drive back from the festival, their conversation, and he was unable to figure the way back to her apartment. So he took her to his hotel room, where he inhabited the floor and she the bed. When dawn broke, he sat in the chair wrapped in her sweater, the scent about him. He simply watched her sleep. Yeah, it was like that. Apollo 11 landed, the rest of the room gripped by the television. It was a fine day to be an American. Roger felt it was 200 years from where they were yesterday at the festival. And he wonders, might there be common ground for them, a historian and an engineer, he facing backward to the mysteries of the past, she to the future and its dazzling gleam? Then the room relaxed in cheers and babbling, and she turned in his arms to kiss him hard and cling to him. And he thought perhaps it didn't matter that they faced in opposite directions, so long as they faced each other. I love how chapter 5 ends. As long as they're facing each other. Do you think that Claire and Frank could have reconciled the way they were facing? I'm talking in the books, not the TV show. TV Claire and Frank are different. Just like TV Brianna and Roger and Jamie Atal are different. I'm talking in the context of the books. I think they would have probably stayed married because that was the thing that you did. But even without Brianna to be that stabilizer, I think they would have stayed married and had separate lives like they did. Regardless of Jamie. They would have had more intimacy, but I think they would have grown away from each other in time. You know, Roger understands Brianna's qualms. He understands what makes them different. He also understands if they face each other, work together, they can be a couple. He's a realist and a romantic. She's a realist and a reluctant romantic. They share so many qualities with her mother and her father's. I look forward to growing with them individually and as a duo. And it's interesting to me how Brianna shares some of the qualities of her mother, where she goes back to the natural earth. Like she thought about the spider's web and how everything's entangled, even though she was using it to calm herself and to kind of just extinguish some of the things going on in her head for the moment, wrapping them up to snack on later. As creepy as that is. But she's very complicated, and I know it's not easy to like Brianna, especially in the beginning of Voyager. She is so immature and she's grieving for her father still. She's finding out all this information, and she's not equipped to handle it. She's also raised an only child, which only children are a different breed than people who come from multiple children families. Their expectations are different. They don't have anybody else to rely on if their world falls apart, like if the parents get divorced or whatever. So all of this comes crashing down on her. And the experience she had with Frank as her daddy was very different from what Claire experienced as Frank's wife when she came back through the stones. And Claire couldn't help herself. And Frank chose to stay. I don't see him as a victim. Some people do. I don't. He didn't have to stay. But he wanted to be a father. This was his opportunity to do so. Brianna becomes much more likable as she becomes less selfish and self-centered and impetuous, I think is the right word, where she starts to see things outside of herself. And we can look at her going through the processes of, I need to disengage in order to re-engage and make a choice. I don't want to do something simply because I'm obligated to do so. And Claire and Frank's marriage was that of obligation. Was it crushing obligation? I don't know. I think it needed to be what it was for them. But now she has to climb out of that to make her own way and to figure out what she wants from Roger, if she indeed wants that, if she can do that. What happens if she hurts him like her mother did and falls in love with somebody else, like her mother hurt Frank? She couldn't help it. She didn't mean to, but she still did it. So I think some of this is a great maturation process for her. And it's good for her to be doing this before she and Roger commit to each other, if that, in fact, is what they're going to do. So in the interesting links I posted at the bottom of the show notes, I talk about bagging Munros, what is a Kaylee, how to do the dances, Highland games, the history of bull runs, a demonstration, the minister's cat game, some video from the 78th Fraser Highlanders pipe band, and some other clan information, and, of course, the information about the different songs that Roger was singing. And I wrap it up with the Apollo 11 landing. So what's coming up for week 4? Chapters 6 and 7. And, of course, as a reminder, you can read ahead as far as you want. And if you have thoughts, questions, comments, etc., and you're on chapter 40, please email them to me or leave a voicemail, 719-425-9444. The email is contact@adramavoutlander.com. And I will put them aside until I do that podcast, and I'll include your question, and I will be sure to respond to you with my thoughts. So, how can you participate? Join the Facebook community. It is amazing. The group you have to ask to join and answer a few short questions, and it's A Dram of Outlander. The page is the big page, and I get to do all the posting on there, and it's A Dram of Outlander. On Twitter and Instagram, it's Dram of Outlander without the A. And of course, the website is adramavoutlander.com. You can find all of the podcasts listed there to listen to directly if you'd like. All the links to the streaming services such as Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Google Play are on there. You can find all the related written posts that have my show notes or as close to it as I'm going to get for you, and all the links of interest, as well as all of the posts that I've written for the TV show and a couple of interviews. But you can participate in the read-along by sending me your comments by email or calling the listener line by Friday each week. Join in the weekly Twitter chat on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time using the hashtag ADOO. Yes, for a dram of Outlander. So it's not 0, it's O. And any comments or messages may be included in the podcast or the written post. You can also participate by please sharing the podcast. Tell people where to find it. Have them listen. You can go into Apple Podcasts and leave me a review that will help more people find what I'm doing. And the Dram of Outlander community is pretty amazing. A bunch of really smart, wonderful people who want to interact and want to do it without drama, which I find fabulous because I live in a drama-free zone. That's not what I prefer. So I appreciate you, my listeners, and those who are in the Dram of Outlander community, whichever part you participate in. You are amazing, and I appreciate you immensely. The other way that you can support the show is financially. I'm a single person podcast, and I do everything to support the show by myself. You can go to patreon.com/A Dram of Outlander, and for as little as $1 a month, you can help me continue the show. And if you'd like to make a one-time offering, just send me an email or leave a voicemail, and I will tell you how to do that. I look forward to tackling this book in the next 32 episodes. And as always, until next time, Slán va.